Hello, let's begin working on geography number 2 for today, the one that looks like this from your packet. First, I'd like you to pause the video and look up Isaiah 40 verse 22 and write it down. So go ahead and pause it now and write it down. All right, now you're back. The interesting thing about this verse is that it talks about the earth being round. Way back, Isaiah was back 1,000 years before Jesus. People didn't know the earth was round, but God did. And he had Isaiah talk about the earth being round. So that's pretty interesting. Often in scripture we see things mentioned that show a knowledge of science and the physical world that people at that time didn't have, but God did, and he put those ideas in the mouth of his prophets, and they spoke it. So that's pretty interesting. The next section talks about Earth's motions. So the Earth does two things. It goes around the sun once every, how often? Once every year, and it spins on its axis once every, how often? That's right, once every 24 hours. So let's look, let's see, here's Europe. And in 24 hours, it goes around, it goes around, and it goes around, and it goes around, and it goes around, and 24 hours later, it's back in the same spot right there. So there's two motions. Let's write down what those are. So the Earth moves around the sun. Oh, that's not a good one. Once each year. And that's one. And the second thing it does is it turns on its own axis once every 24 hours. So I want you to write those things down under Earth's motions. Pause the video if you need time to write that. Going back to the verse that we read from Isaiah that says the earth is round, the earth is not a perfect sphere, not a perfect ball. It's a little bit fatter right at the equator, right at the middle, because it's spinning so fast that the middle is kind of bulging out just a little bit. So it's actually called a spheroid. That means a sphere-like thing. So underneath the Bible verse, the Isaiah 40:22, on the bottom line under the earth's form, right? The earth is a sphere, S-P-H, whoops, helps if you spell it right. Sphere, S-P-H, the P-H says F, E-R-E, spheroid. Spheroid, O-I-D. So write the whole sentence. The earth is a spheroid. So let's write down some of the dimensions of the earth now, where it asks for it here. Earth's dimensions. The diameter of the earth. Diameter means the distance across from one side to the other side, through the middle, not around the outside of the globe, but through the middle. So at the equator, so you see under diameter, there's two choices, and we just talked about how the Earth isn't quite round. It kind of bulges out just a little bit at the sides. You wouldn't be able to see it with your eyes, probably, but it's not perfectly round. So write down number one, right at the equator. So the equator, it's 7,927 miles, 7,927 miles. I'm going to write miles over here because I ran out of room. Miles. So that's here. At the poles, going from the North Pole, actually it's more like the North Pole to the South Pole, because you know the Earth is tilted this direction from top to bottom. So at the poles, it's 7,900 miles. So it's only a little bit more. You see the difference? The 7,000 is the same, the 900 is the same. The only difference is it's 27 miles more at the equator, and we're going to talk about what the equator is in a minute, than it is from North Pole to South Pole. So that's that bulging, that spheroid, that spreading out in the middle because of the spinning, pushing it outward. And then the circumference of the Earth, circumference means the distance around the outside. Let me go get my globe, hold on. Hi, I'm back. Okay, so the first figure we talked about was the diameter. That means if you shot an arrow right through the middle and measured from one side to the other. But the circumference is around the outside, all the way around the outside. How far would it be if you put a measuring tape around the Earth's tummy, or his waist, his belt, which is, this is the equator, this line that goes right through the widest, right around the widest part of the Earth. So that's the circumference. So that's your second block right here. Circumference of the Earth is, let's move over here. Around the equator, so you can write that again, equator is 24,860 miles. 24,860 miles at the equator, and going along from North Pole to South Pole, we're going to learn this terminology more in a minute, but these lines that go from the top to the bottom of the globe are called meridians. So following one of these lines from the top to the bottom and back around up to the top, we call that the meridional. Make sure I spell it right, meridian, O-N-A-L, distance from the top to the bottom. So now we're measuring, before we were measuring around this way, now we're measuring from here to the other end where it goes around the bulge. So it's longer. It's 24,902. 24,902 miles. Not very much more Just a little bit, like 150, 160 more miles. Not big enough for you to be able to really see it compared to 24,000 miles, just a little extra. But it does show us that the Earth is not a perfect round ball. It goes out just a little bit at the middle where it's spinning the fastest. So now we're going to put in some information on this map down here, some of these words we've been talking about. So right here, this solid line right across here, what is that called? It's the imaginary line dividing the world into a northern and southern hemisphere. That means half of a sphere. What's it called? Yeah, the equator. We've been using that word a lot. So labeling this right here, this solid line, it doesn't look like the middle, but that's because we're kind of looking at the globe a little bit from on top. So instead of looking at it straight on like this, we're kind of looking at it from the top a little bit. See the equator? Right there, it looks like it's right around the middle. But if we kind of peek over at the top, it looks like it's lower. That's the equator. You already caught that word. I've written it a couple of times already. So you can just copy that word, equator. Then we have a couple of other major lines on here. Let's look first of all at this line. This is the one that's the equator going the other way, kind of. It's the imaginary line dividing the world into an eastern and western hemisphere, half a sphere. Let me get the globe again. So that, actually you can see on my globe, see this dotted line right here? That one right there. Goes all the way around, and then underneath you can see it goes up the other side. That is the Prime Meridian. Let me write that on the board. It's the main one. Prime means first. So that's called the Prime Meridian. And it goes right through England. It goes through a city called Greenwich, England. It's the 0 line. So write that down. Okay, now pause the video if you need to catch up, but listen now. Stop writing and listen to me. So the equator is the 0 measure going around this way. If you go up this way, it's degrees north. If you go down this way, it's degrees south. And we have all these little lines that go around the Earth. They're not really there. You can go out and find them. But we've put them on the globe so that we can say, well, you know, Togo is a little island at this many degrees south and this many degrees east, or whatever. And people know exactly where you're talking about. It's kind of like when you're playing Battleship and someone says A14. You know exactly which square is A14. Hope you played Battleship before. So equator is the 0 between the top and the bottom, the north and the south. The Prime Meridian, the one that goes through England, is the divider between the east and the west. So that's what that divides the world into 2 halves, east and west. This line divides the world into 2 halves, north and south. All right, let's see what else there is to measure, to label on our map. We have 2 other imaginary lines, these 2 dotted lines. This one is the Tropic of Cancer. Not giving you cancer like the disease. Cancer, a different constellation in the sky. So, Tropic of Cancer. So that's the northern boundary of the tropics at 23 degrees north. And then the one down, the dotted line down here, that's the Tropic of Capricorn. Tropic of Capricorn. These are named after constellations in the sky. So those are the boundaries, the north and south boundaries of the tropics. And we're going to learn about the tropics in science. I believe it's this week. It's an area of climate in the world where the weather is very warm all year, and it rains a lot usually in most of the areas. You have the tropical rainforests. You've probably heard of those. So that's the divisions of the earth. So you're learning a little bit about how we can talk about different places on the globe using these words. Now, on the next page that's stapled to this one is some information. There's something to write on here, but these are interesting information you need to know. So up here it talks about latitude. Let's read it together. You can find places in the world by knowing how to read latitude and longitude lines. Longitudes are those meridian lines, the up and down lines. These are imaginary lines, and you have already learned two, the equator and the prime meridian. So it says latitude, I'm in the yellow box right here now. Latitude is the angular distance of any object from the equator measured in degrees. That's kind of complicated, but it just means the distance from the equator. The main line of latitude is the equator. The lines of latitude circle the globe and are parallel to each other. Parallel means they're always the same distance apart. They never come together, they never go apart. Parallel, like the sides of the railroad track. That means that the lines are always the same distance apart. They never meet. Sometimes lines of latitude are also called parallels. Well, that's nice. So latitude lines run from east to west. They measure the distance north and south of the equator, and the equator is marked as 0 degrees. So some of this we've already talked about. This is a little review. It puts it all in one place. Longitude. Let's read that. As we have just learned, the lines extending around the Earth horizontally are called latitude. They measure how far north or south an object is. But in the yellow box now, the lines running vertically around the globe are called longitude, the ones that go from the top to the bottom. These lines are called meridians and measure how far east or west an object is located. Lines of longitude run from the north to the south, and they meet at the poles. So latitude lines are parallel. They go around the Earth. It's like if you took the Earth and sliced it in equal-sized slices all the way down. But the longitude lines all start together at the top, and as they go down, they spread out, and then they come back together again. So if you have a globe at home, you can look at that. Otherwise, when you get back to school, we'll be looking at the globe a little bit more. You may have already noticed those lines. And you can tell exactly where you are on the Earth by those. So here's a little thing of bringing longitude and latitude together. You can remember the lines of latitude run east and west. They look like the rungs on a ladder that go this way. Rungs are the things you step on a ladder. So ladder, latitude. You can remember which way the lines of longitude go by remembering the word long. The lines are long. And it's the first 4 letters in the word longitude. So they go from top to bottom the long way. The latitudes go around like the ladder, like the steps on the ladder. So here you've got latitude in yellow, longitude is the blue one, and the Earth's grid is the green. When you put yellow and blue together, you get green. So it's a grid. It's like when we do graph paper. You know how graph paper has lines and they go both ways, like playing, like I said, like playing Battleship. You say, I'm going to send a bomb to A3. So you go A, whoops, I goofed. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So A3, we cross A and down 3 and right there. That's the spot, A3. Same thing on the Earth. You tell somebody the latitude and longitude of a place, they can find their way to it. All right, we're going to learn more about this next time. Bye.